International Student Recruitment Manager at Imperial College London. And Miriam Aczel. How do you pronounce your surname, Miriam?
Yeah, that's perfect, Aczel.
Ah, super. So Miriam is a postgraduate at a research postgraduate at Imperial College London Centre for Environmental Policy, and she's pursuing a PhD in environmental research. She also holds a Master of Science in Environmental Technology from Imperial and a Bachelor in Geography and Earth Science from McGill University in Canada. So originally from Boston, Massachusetts, her research looks at fracking for shale gas extraction, which is a controversial technology with demonstrated impacts on the environment, human and animal health, climate change and human rights. So her objective is to propose recommendations to improve environmental and health protections in the UK through a citizen-driven approach. She's published several research papers in academic journals, even while still being a student, and has received Imperial's Outstanding Student Achievement Award in 2018. And if that wasn't enough, Miriam is also a co-founder and co-director of a non-profit that works to promote science and math education in Cambodia. And she speaks fluent French, Italian, and Hebrew, and has spent semesters studying in Paris, Italy, and in Maryland. So she was been a visiting researcher in Washington and in China. So incredible list of accomplishments, Miriam. So today she's going to be talking to us about her multidisciplinary approach to tackling the climate crisis and why she believes that citizen science plays a key role in implementing global change. And she's also going to be talking to us a bit about why she decided to study in the UK and why she's still staying there to pursue a PhD. So remember that you can participate in this webinar by submitting your questions in the Q&A box on your screen. Feel free to submit your questions at any time. We'll be taking all questions at the end, but yeah, feel free to write as they come to you throughout the presentation. So that's it from me, and I will now be handing over to Miriam. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, let me share my screen. All right, can you see that all right?
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect, thank you so much. Well, thank you all for joining. I'm really, really excited to talk to you today. I'm Miriam, and I'm a President Scholar, PhD candidate at Imperial College, and I'm supervised by Karen McCooch, and I'm at the Center for Environmental Policy in London. And I left my contact details up there, so please feel free to reach out afterwards, or if you have other questions, but I'm really happy to stay in touch. So first, here's just a quick overview of my academic trajectory so far. So I did my bachelor's in McGill in Montreal, and I actually started out, I think what's one of the things that I find really important is this idea that it's never too late to change what you're studying or get something new, pick up a new skill. So I actually started out thinking that I wanted to study linguistics, and I was in the Faculty of Arts, and I thought I wanted to study humanities, but I was sort of always struggling with this, having to choose between both being interested in science and being interested in art. And it wasn't until my third year when I took an astrophysics class that I discovered I had this real passion for science and science communication. And finally, by my fourth year, I actually switched into sciences. And it was a challenging route because I had to retake all of the, the core courses like physics and math and chemistry. But it was really very rewarding. And I think the reason I love my research right now and the work that I'm doing is because I don't actually have to choose between the arts and the sciences. It's very multidisciplinary. And I think as you see, as I talk a little bit more about my research, you'll see why it really combines both the sort of, science communication and the humanities and the citizen-driven and kind of social element with the technical environmental science side. And I think that there's a huge role for arts and music and literature in science, and specifically in environmental communication. So that was my undergraduate. I did a year abroad in Sciences Politiques in Paris. And during my year abroad, I went to visit London. I visited Imperial, absolutely fell in love with the city and all of the opportunities that London provides, and decided that I wanted to do my master's at Imperial. And then the following year, I did my master's in environmental technology on the global environmental change and policy option. And I had a really great experience with that. Unfortunately, one of the things that I love is that I get to give lectures on the course now as a PhD student. And then after following the master's, I decided that, 1 year wasn't enough and I wanted to stay on for more. And so that's why I'm here doing the PhD now. So my home is the Center for Environmental Policy, and I love it because it's a really interdisciplinary department. We have people working in environmental economics, environmental science, engineers, social scientists. My PhD supervisor is a human rights lawyer. So it's really very multidisciplinary. And the master's that I did, the environmental technology is really taken to mean any tool that can be used for the betterment of the environment. So it's environmental law. And for me, it was a very exciting and intense year because I had my first exposure to many different subjects. I had never taken a law course before and really enjoyed it. And at the same time, you're doing statistics and biology. So it was really very multidisciplinary and intense, but very rewarding. So how did I get into my research? During the master's, I was watching a documentary, Gasland, and I had never heard of fracking. I had never heard of shale gas. And I was shocked when I saw this documentary that this technology has been expanding really rapidly all over the United States, and even in my home state in Massachusetts and in New York and neighboring places. And I had no idea. And so I got really interested in it, and the film is really great. It talks about all of the negative impacts, and I thought, well, it doesn't make sense to me that if there are all these negative impacts, don't people have a say? And I got interested in looking at the UK at the time was really interested, and still is, in extracting shale gas. And so I thought, well, maybe I can do research in terms of helping to ensure that this is, if the government decides to pursue a new and controversial technology, how can you ensure that people have a say and that the environmental damage is minimized? So my research really looks at international energy and environmental science and policy and the kind of interface between the two of them. And then I'm also involved in some other research projects. I have a couple of master's students now that I'm supervising, and we're working on a project on greenhouse gas removal technologies. And then I also have been doing research on citizen science and environmental education. So that kind of gives me a little bit of climate optimism, because a lot of the work has been looking at engaging children. So first, just a really brief primer. What exactly is fracking? It's a technology that's used to break rock at really high pressures to release oil and gas that's trapped in the shale rock. So shale rock, if you think of it like a sponge, a hard sponge or a pumice, and inside the little crevices, there is oil and gas trapped. But as you can see from this diagram, it's really deep underground, about 1 to 3 kilometers below the surface of the ground, and it's trapped in this rock. So first, hydraulic fracturing, you're really fracturing the rock to create these little fissures, and then you pump millions of gallons of water with a mixture of water and chemicals, so things like lubricants that help the gas flow out of the rock deep underground. And then you release the pressure, all of the water with the mixture of chemicals flows back up to the surface. And then when you remove the pressure, after the water moves back up to the surface, the gas then flows up to the surface and it can be collected. So if conventional oil or gas is kind of like an orange and you just stick a straw into it and you suck the juice out, unconventional is really like you know, you have to do something, you have to transform the rock. And so it takes a lot of energy, massive amounts of water. And one of the biggest problems is if you think about this water that's going 2 to 3 kilometers underground, and it has a mixture of all kinds of chemicals, you can have issues with contamination of water. As you can see from the diagram, it has to go below the water table. So you can have contamination of groundwater, contamination of surface water. Many studies have shown that it has also led to seismic activity, both from the actual fracturing of the rock and then also the disposal of the wastewater, because now after you remove the water and it comes back up to the surface, you have millions of gallons of contaminated water, often brings with it you know, radioactive materials that are naturally occurring underground. And so then you have this problem of all kinds of contaminated water. So sometimes that's disposed of in these pits, evaporation pits, and it gets into the water system. So there are quite significant environmental issues, health issues. There have been a lot of the chemicals that are used in the fracturing fluid have been shown to cause cancers. So you could see from the potential issues here that the regulation is really crucial, and it's a novel and controversial technology. And many states have bans, many countries have bans, such as France, while other countries are looking to expand operations. So one of the first things that I looked into, I was really interested in comparing California and New York and why shale gas extraction is banned in New York, but it's legal in California. And it's actually, there's a really massive shale gas industry in California. And I was surprised, I didn't know this at all. But I was interested to know, how can you have two states that California is frequently at the, you know, at the forefront of environmental regulations, both have really strong environmental legacies. So how is it that two states can look at the same body of data that we have and come to different conclusions, where one has an absolute ban on fracking and the other one has a really large and developed shale gas industry? So I decided to look at how these two states came to the decisions that they came to, and that was through an environmental impact assessment. So an environmental impact assessment is a hugely important process of looking at the potential environmental consequences of a project before deciding to proceed. So especially with something that's as controversial as shale gas is, it's a really important step that has to be done before anything can proceed. And the point is really to ensure that we know about all the potential impacts and that there are mitigation plans, or that any potential environmental damage is either avoided, or when it's not possible to avoid it, it's mitigated. And it's an iterative process, so it is a kind of a continual process. And one of the most important parts, I think, is that it has stakeholder engagement. So public participation, public comments, public feedback. If something is going to be happening in your backyard or your family's backyard, your friend's backyard, you want to be able to have a say in it. So first I looked at California, and these are just a couple of pictures from the my first visit to an unconventional oil and gas field. And looking at their environmental impact assessment, it was mandated by the state's government, and it was a one-year environmental impact assessment. They didn't conduct a health impact assessment, and there was a lot of criticism about the final environmental impact assessment report. So they said there was a really limited information on the life cycle effects, so the effects from the well preparation, the very beginning stages of the preparation of the site, to the end of the well's life. So after, after the well is no longer producing gas or oil, it has to be sealed. And there are a lot of really important impacts that can happen after a well is no longer productive. You can still have methane, which is a really powerful greenhouse gas, leakage, as well as other contamination. And then one of the key issues was that as part of the environmental impact assessment, there was a requirement to have an independent scientific review. But this independent scientific review by California's Council on Science and Technology didn't come out until after the final environmental impact statement was finalized. So they had completed the assessment and they didn't include this independent review, which had a lot of really important data on health impacts of shale gas, environmental impacts of shale gas, and the impacts on climate change. So after just 1 year, the state concluded that fracking could safely proceed and that there weren't significant risks. So in stark contrast to this, New York State did a 7-year environmental impact assessment process. They did do a public health impact assessment, and the health commissioner found that there were significant uncertainties. So because it was not possible to say without a doubt that there weren't significant impacts to human health, the public health impact assessment concluded that fracking was not safe for human and animal health. One of the important things is that the Delaware River Basin supplies water for about 16 million people. And that is exactly, lying on top of the area where the shale gas resources were. So there was a lot of concern over water. And one of the biggest differences that I found was the amount of public feedback. So New York State during the 7-year period received over 260,000 public comments, and each one of these comments had to be incorporated, they had to be responded to. So that was part of the reason why it also took so long. And then roughly around the same time when California concluded that fracking was safe, New York State concluded on a ban, a moratorium, which then led to a ban on fracking. So that was the first case study that I looked into, and that's just kind of an example of the kind of research that I do. And in the UK, you can see from these images here, all of the blue and red areas are where important aquifers are. So you can see that water is and water contamination is a hugely important issue. And so that was why I became interested in looking at how the UK could learn from the US's much longer experience in terms of minimizing environmental health and damage. So shale gas is often referred to as the Swiss cheese of leaks. And shale gas is frequently cited as a bridge fuel. So meaning that until we're able to have completely renewable energies, until we can just be running off solar and geothermal and wind technologies, because of the intermittence in the days when the sun's not shining, we need a backup fuel. And so people frequently cite shale gas, unconventional gas, as a potential bridge fuel. So in case there's a day when there's no wind or there's no sun, then you can use natural gas as a backup. And natural gas is frequently used as a backup for renewable technologies. But the problem is, many of the studies that say that it can be used as a bridge fuel assume that it's just because natural gas burns cleaner than coal or oil, because when you burn natural gas, it releases just carbon dioxide and water. And it has much less environmental impacts, much less greenhouse gas release from other technologies, including other fuels, including oil and coal. But that's not really true if you look at the entire life cycle. So from the beginning of the well's site preparation to the end of the well's functional life, even after it's no longer producing, and studies have shown that after 30 years, 60% of all wells will leak. And this is also hugely important because after 30 years, sometimes companies go bankrupt, and it leads to a situation that's known as orphan wells, where nobody's legally responsible for preventing the emissions from a well that's now no longer producing. So this just shows that with this issue in mind, the UK needs to plan for longer term and look at the entire life cycle, and not just whether the fuel for fuel natural gas is cleaner than coal or oil. So then I spent quite a bit of time up in the north of England in Lancashire and near Blackpool, looking at the situation there. That was sort of back in 2011, the first exploratory drilling for shale gas was conducted by a company called Quadrilla. And at the time in 2011, they had to shut down operations because of seismic activity. There were, minor earthquakes and tremors. So they shut down all operations. And there's been a huge amount of public opposition. One of the groups that I spent time interviewing was the Nanas Against Fracking. So Nanas are grandmothers. It's this sort of idea that they're kind of like the mama bears looking out for their children, and this idea that the planet is like their children, and the future sustainability of the earth is their responsibility. So they've taken it upon themselves to protect their communities, the environment, and they wear all yellow, and it was, I spent quite a bit of time getting to know the different groups there and understanding the reasons for the strong opposition to shale gas. So another one of the case studies that I did was comparing public perspectives to shale gas in the UK and in France and Algeria. And Algeria is a really interesting case because it was a former French colony, and there's a high degree of opposition to shale gas in Algeria, but Algeria does have a shale gas industry. And so what happened in France was France actually has the second largest shale gas resources in Europe, so much larger than the UK's resources. But there was a very, very high degree of public opposition. And if you can see from these pictures below, this was in a tiny little town called Barjac in the south of France, right kind of at the epicenter of where the shale gas basins are. And this town is an organic town. There are no pesticides allowed. And it normally has a population of 400 to 500 people. So it's very small. And when I went, there was a protest scheduled against shale gas. And this was back in 2016. And the day that I went there, you know, I spent the day talking to people. There's a massive amount of people showed up at this tiny little village. And I saw later on the news that there were there's something like 20,000 people had shown up. So that just shows kind of the high degree of people are really willing to mobilize and stand up against something. And the case of France is really interesting because due to this high degree of public opposition, the government in 2016 had a ban, an all-out ban on hydraulic fracturing as a technology to extract shale gas. And then at the time, it was a potential loophole because this meant that if there was another type of technology that could be used to extract shale gas, so instead of using hydraulic fracturing or water-powered fracturing of the rock, if there was a possibility of using electronic fracturing, so electrical currents that are pulsed underground to break up the rock, or pneumatic fracturing, compressed air, it could technically be permissible. And then just last year, France had another more comprehensive rule that said that there was no fossil fuel extraction on any of their territories. But what happened after fracking was banned in France was that the major company here that was looking to extract shale gas moved its operations to Algeria. So you have this sort of continuation of a post-colonial legacy where, because shale gas was deemed not safe and there was this high degree of public opposition, and France has a very strong legacy of listening to public opposition. And this sort of, the public protest is a very important, cultural and social element to life in France and French culture. So because they had this ban in France, operations were moved to Algeria. And so now there have been violent clashes in Algeria, and there's a really strong degree of public opposition, but the government isn't really listening to this high degree of public opposition. So that was another case study that I had looked at, and what are mechanisms that could help enhance public participation and ensure that, for example, in the case of New York, you really get those 260,000 public comments. It's not just the kind of ticking the box process where you say, yes, we're doing public engagement, but they're really, people's concerns are listened to. And in the case of the UK, I found that one of the most important issues with shale gas extraction was related to this public opposition. In 2016, Lancashire County Council had voted that they did not want to permit unconventional oil and gas extraction in Lancashire. And the Secretary of State for local counties, so he's charged with taking into account the perspectives and the will, and really listening to the will of the people, local councils, overturned the Lancashire County Council's decision on grounds of national interest. So you can see there's this clash where there's a conflict between the government says that, or the English government says that there's a need to extract shale gas, and there's really strong national interest for it, for energy security, whereas the local council and the people have spoken and they've said that they're in opposition to it. And so this is a situation where national interest trumped local interest. And it seems like it kind of keeps going back and forth. Recently, Boris Johnson then said that the UK was not going to extract shale gas, but these are all sort of very tenuous decisions, and they can change over different political stages, different leadership. So I think this is why the will of the people is always very, very important, regardless of what the leadership is, making sure that the public is engaged. And another case study that I looked at was comparing seismic activity related to shale gas extraction in Oklahoma and in Lancashire. So in Oklahoma never had, they had tornadoes, but they never had earthquakes. And if you can see from this figure, between 2009 to 2015, there was a massive rise in seismic activity. And there was also a lot of public stress and anxiety related to, there were studies that showed the number of Google searches about earthquakes really sharply increased. And this was because of an expansion of shale gas extraction operations. And so the seismic activity can be generated both from the rock breaking stage, because you can cause a slippage of the rocks, as well as the injection of wastewater. So after you've released the pressure and you've drawn all the water back up to the surface, frequently it's disposed of in underground pits. And so you inject it back underground. And so you're both putting an incredible amount of pressure and an incredible amount of water underground. And the water can act as a lubricant and cause pre-existing faults, like the one in the picture on the left there, to slip. And that's where you get these earthquake activities generated. And in the case of Lancashire, as I had mentioned before, in 2011, Quadrilla had to stop testing of fracking because of 2 earthquakes of 1.5 and 2.2 magnitude. So I thought this was a good segue into what I was really excited to talk about, which is citizen science. So when I was looking into seismic activity in Oklahoma and the fact that this has become a massive problem, and throughout the preparation of the case study and the research that I did, there was quite a lot of data, but it wasn't being incorporated into the regulations. And I read about this project that was at a University of Oklahoma that was using Raspberry Shakes. So it uses a Raspberry Pi computer technology, really small, portable little computers. And you can mount it on a small seismograph, which measures seismic activity, earth shaking. And that means that pretty much anybody can make their own seismograph using these tiny little computers, and they can be made for a couple of $100s. And it's a great opportunity for citizen science. So citizen science is in science that's conducted by the public, by non-scientists, non-specialists, but under the guidance of trained scientists. So I think what I really like is this idea that it's very democratic. Anybody can be a citizen scientist, anybody can contribute to scientific research. And a lot of the research that I've been doing recently is looking at engaging children. And there are a lot of really wonderful opportunities for getting kids engaged in science from a really young age, getting them outdoors, getting them engaged with the environment. And so one of the solutions that I thought would be really interesting for the UK is to have a citizen science project that looks at seismic activity. And it's also a really great teaching activity, because with one of these little Raspberry Shake devices, you can teach kids about earthquakes. You can have one kid jump in front of the seismic, the seismograph, and then another one can, tell exactly when the jump occurred by looking at the reading of it. So it's both really great for a teaching tool, and also, imagine if you knew that there were these unconventional gas operations expanding in your backyard, and you were really, really worried about earthquakes, and you knew that you felt one night, but you couldn't prove it. So it really puts power into people's hands. It's not just relying on anecdotal evidence. Yesterday I felt slight shaking, but you really would be able to go back and have a tool that could show at exactly this time happened. Then you would be able to go to whatever company is operating the oil and gas extraction and ask if operations were going on at that time. And so it really is a powerful and democratic tool for bringing scientific data into people's hands, and then also to contribute to the collection of scientific data. So another one of my research focuses is eco-citizen science, environmental citizen science projects, and engaging kids with environmental citizen science. And so I've done research looking into the really wide-ranging educational, psychological, and social benefits of getting kids involved in citizen science. And a lot of the studies have shown that the earlier you get kids involved with environmental issues, the earlier you allow them to, and not just, learn about environmental issues, but really see for themselves, find proof of, species disappearing or rising temperatures or water pollutants, allowing them to have a hands-on experience. Studies have shown that later in life, it leads to children become adults who become stewards of the environment. So there's an important role in engaging kids from a very early age with the environment, because it leads to environmental stewardship. And there's also a theory, nature deficit disorder, which was proposed by Loeb in a really fantastic book called Last Child Outdoors. And it talks about this idea that today's kids are becoming less and less connected, more and more disconnected with nature, and they tend to spend more and more time following sedentary lifestyles on their phones, on their computers, and not exploring outside as much. And there are a lot of negative impacts to this, both in terms of physical health. To support a healthy gut microbiome, there's exposure to microbes that kids need from being outside. And then also, physically, mentally, studies show that access to green space and even a small amount of time outside every day leads to improved moods, more creativity. There's also a lot of really interesting studies that show significant improvement in children with learning disorders, such as ADD and ADHD, attention deficit disorders, by having time outside learning, time to explore and learn in a hands-on way. And it makes learning more fun, more interesting, more engaging. So one of the projects that I've been working on is developing a series of recommendations for how to get kids engaged with citizen science. So one of the big challenges, of course, is data and privacy. If you're collecting scientific data, if you really want kids to be able to contribute to scientific data, and they can if they're shown how to do it, and if it's designed, if the project is designed according to their skill set, their current level of skills. But you have to make sure that you get consent, of a lot of common sense guidelines that can help engage kids. So ensuring you get parental consent, keeping things anonymous, not posting pictures of children if they don't expressly, and their parents and guardians don't give permission. But then other things, such as one of the studies looked at comparing the success of a series of 3 to 6 year old kids at measuring plant heights. And they were validating the data on plant height, the citizen science collected data from kids with the same data collected by scientists. And what they discovered was that a lot of the kids hadn't yet learned how to measure things. They didn't know how to use rulers properly. They hadn't yet had as much experience with addition and subtraction. So counting, simple tasks like counting things for their age group, they did just as well as the scientists. But other things like measuring height, they had a lot more inaccuracies. So that's just kind of a common sense bit of advice, of guidance that can help ensure that there are that the citizen science projects are according to kids' current level and understanding. So one example that I really like is sampling of ocean debris in Chile. So this was a 2-month eco-citizen science project, and it had almost 1,000 kids between ages 8 to 16. And those were kids from Chile and Easter Island, and they helped provide data on small plastic debris on the beaches. And afterwards, they did a survey to see, and the project ran for 2 months, and it both helped, contribute to the amount of data, the scientific body of information on small plastic debris. And then afterwards, when they surveyed the kids, they found that prior to this program, 75% of them had never heard of small plastic debris. So it was good for engagement, kind of education. And then for 62% of them, it was their first environmental activity. But then 96% of them said that they found it really, really satisfying, and they wanted to participate in future activities. All right, so those are just a couple of examples of the citizen science research that I've been doing, and it kind of helps me have a little bit of environmental optimism. I think that there's a very important role in regulation of new technologies like shale gas for citizen science. And I also think that, nobody's too young to be involved in citizen science. And as you see now, there's been this really massive mobilization of young people protesting for the climate. And so I think that there's a clear will of young people and young children as well. And at the same time, we're also living in a time where there's more of a disconnect between people and nature, and people are more increasingly sort of on their phones and leading sedentary lives. So engaging kids in citizen science activities is a really good way of both kind of, filling this need for access to nature, access to the environment. It has a real wealth of positive impacts. And I think citizen science can really has positive social good, can lead to social good or environmental justice in three ways. I think the first way is through generating data, helping science, so generating scientific data, contributing to the body of scientific information. And often hobbyists know much more than scientists do, especially when it comes to, bird watchers will know much more about the species that they're seeing sometimes than trained scientists do. So there's really important and valuable data that comes from citizen science. And it also has massive benefits to society as a whole. It connects people. So in the case of children, studies have shown that it helps them develop their interpersonal skills, their social skills, by getting them together and doing something with other children in a hands-on and holistic fashion and a participatory fashion. So they're contributing to something that's part of a bigger project for the greater good. And then on an individual level, so that, in addition to these benefits to science and to society, I think there are really important individual benefits as well. Education, time outdoors, increased and enhanced moods, series of benefits, as long as the projects are designed appropriately. And I think this kind of gets to, something that is really important to me, which is science communication, and kind of where my nonprofit work kind of mirrors what I'm trying to promote in my academic research. So in 2015, I co-founded an organization that works on promoting scientific education in Cambodia. And so this was set up in memory of my father, who was a mathematician and very passionate about science communication and getting young people engaged in science. So some of our activities have been, we held a conference for 500 first-year Cambodian math students. And what was really, really exciting to me about this conference was that it was a zero waste conference, or as close to zero waste as possible. So we had the catering, the meals that we had, we only used banana leaves, we didn't have any plastic. And it was a really great opportunity to show that, events can be made green. And it was also, it was a great way of combining my passion for science education and engaging young people and with environmental sustainability. And our focus is really connecting and encouraging young women and promoting them in STEM careers. So this idea that, even if you didn't initially start out in studying science, but you discover that you have a love for it, even if it's the harder path, that it can be really rewarding, and especially with encouraging girls in science. So that's sort of one of the other hats that I wear. And then I'm also the communications director for a DC-based organization called Leaders in Energy. So during my PhD, I had the opportunity to spend a couple of semesters in Washington, DC, and I was volunteering at the Environmental Law Institute there. I was contributing to research, writing blog articles for them, and I discovered that I absolutely love blogging about environmental issues. And then while I was in DC, I wanted to get more involved in volunteering with environmental organizations. And I also didn't know anybody, so it's kind of as a way to meet people and sort of meet people who are also interested in environmental issues. I started volunteering with this organization, Leaders in Energy. And what Leaders in Energy does is they try to connect people of all ages across the planet on these issues of environmental sustainability. They host events, they have training and job career fairs, and a lot of focus on really leveraging the collective power of people together to have really important change and to work towards a greater good. So it doesn't matter whether somebody's the CEO of the company or the CEO of their own backyard. Everybody has a really important role to play. And so I started volunteering with them and really loved this organization. And then started writing articles for them about my research, because I think for me, I'm particularly excited about not just the academic research part of it, but communicating the academic research in more accessible ways and blogs and, you know, through events, and communicating it to children in schools. So this kind of gave me an outlet to start blogging about my research. And then eventually I just got, you know, really into communicating environmental issues, and then took over as the blog editor. So this has sort of been another way of engaging with the community and kind of helping make sure that my own research and the things that I think are really important to share expand beyond, you know, beyond just the sort of academic sphere. And then I guess I just wanted to highlight the fact that part of the reason that I was so drawn to London is that the opportunities are endless. And during my master's, I had the opportunity to volunteer at the Natural History Museum, which is literally right next door to Imperial. And I loved it because I worked in the CT scanning lab. So they had just recently acquired this brand new CT scanner. And it was really cool because I knew absolutely nothing about CT scanning prior to starting this internship, but I knew that I wanted to, you know, I knew that I wanted to do something that was kind of more hands-on, and I knew I wanted to volunteer in one of the museums. So I got to learn how to operate a CT scanner, and it was used in the museum to scan mummies. So I remember there was one day they had a mummy that came in on loan from the British Museum, and we got to use the scanner. And then often we would take school groups down and we would show them, you know, the scans showing some of the collections. Or another time we scanned an old armadillo skeleton. And so there's a lot of really interesting scientific discoveries that can come from CT scanning. And at the time when I was there, we were also doing research into connecting the CT scanner with 3D printers. And my research was looking at how to reduce the amount of plastic that's used in the 3D printer. So instead of printing a full object, printing it hollow, with the idea that this could be used as a tool to bring out to schools. So for example, if a teacher was giving a lesson on, you know, the heart or the stomach or something on the parts of the body, in theory, you would then be able to 3D print an actual image of, you know, an actual copy of the heart so that students could see what it really looks like. So it was really interesting, very different from anything that I had done before. And I volunteered there. It was 2 to 3 days a week at the time when I was doing my master's. And there, I mean, I think that what's so great about London and Imperial is that I felt I was really encouraged that, you know, to do extracurricular activities, to volunteer, and I think Imperial makes a really strong point of scientific communication, public engagement, and there are a number of events throughout the year that I really enjoy, that are taken as opportunities to share research with the public. I also have the pleasure of being a graduate teaching assistant on the master's. So I kind of, you know, I couldn't keep myself away. I really enjoyed my experience on the master's course. And so I think what's really, oops, sorry. Yes, that was just, you know, another opportunity for engagement, and kind of staying connected. And I've also taught some undergraduate classes as well. And I find this really rewarding, getting to learn about, you know, what the students are currently learning about. And yeah, and I've stayed in touch with a lot of the students. I think that it's been, I didn't realize that it was possible as a PhD student to kind of continue teaching through the master's course. So that's been really rewarding as well. And so just my research group, kind of, you know, finding my home. And I think that's pretty much it. I just have a couple of other photos of engagement opportunities on campus. And I think I'll, oh, and as mentioned, yeah, I had the opportunity to spend a month conducting research at Tsinghua University in Beijing. So that was a really exciting time, and looking at public perspectives towards shale gas in China. All right.
Fantastic, thank you, Miriam. So I think we've got about 15 minutes left. So Catherine, I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about Imperial in general, or would you like to manage it via Q&A?
I can just do a very quick skim through, and then we can leave some time for questions, certainly.
Fabulous, sounds good.
While Catherine sets up her presentation, I'm just gonna run a quick poll while she changes presentations, just to know a little bit more about the audience. We want to know if you're a student, if you're an advisor, a teacher, and if you can answer the question that should be popping up in your screen.
Sorry, Miriam, I think you just need to stop sharing your screen and then we can do mine. Brilliant.
Okay, a couple more seconds. So if you haven't voted, this is your time to vote. I can see Catherine also, so you know who's the audience. We got some graduate students joining us, also working professionals, and one undergraduate student.
Great. For some reason, it doesn't seem to.
Hey, you should see another question popping in your screen. This is about what level are you interested in studying? So matching what you just answered before, we got a lot of people interested in master's degrees and PhD.
So I think I'm just going to have to quickly quit to get it to share my screen for some reason. So maybe if you want to start asking questions, and I'll be back in like 2 seconds.
Okay. Oh, there we go.
Okay, so everyone's seeing my screen now.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Miriam, for your talk. I think you've done a fantastic job talking about your experience at Imperial and why, you know, it is a great institution to be at, so I won't spend too long on this. And yes, I absolutely love nanas against fracking. So a bit about Imperial. So we are kind of a medium-sized university in terms of the UK, with kind of roughly half and half graduates and undergraduates. We have some fantastic academics, fantastic research, as with us who do win many of the top kind of awards. Also, just to very much kind of mention our community at this time and the whole reasons for these webinars, to kind of highlight the outstanding women we have at Imperial. We've had a whole series of events this week and going on to next week that might be of interest if you want to have a look, just kind of celebrating women at Imperial and looking at how we can kind of raise awareness and support our female students and academics in going further. We have a whole section on the website called Her Imperial, which tells stories about our current students, staff and alumni as well, so do check those out. Generally, you know, we are very highly regarded. We are a specialised university, so quite unique in the UK in that sense, being focused on the sciences, engineering, medicine and business. And we do pretty well in those fields. But I think two kind of rankings I like to highlight that speak a bit more about us are firstly, that we are the most international university in the UK. And that's because of our student and our staff sort of portfolio in terms of the number of countries our students and staff come from, and the percentage as well. So well over half our student population come from outside the UK. So that means you get a real melting pot of ideas and perspectives from across the globe that really kind of feeds into the experience. We've also been voted the most innovative university in the UK, so we really want to support our students, our kind of bright sparks, to kind of go further. So when they have those amazing ideas, they can now use things like our hack space, our enterprise lab, to kind of develop those ideas further and get support for those ideas. As Miriam mentioned, one of the great things about the institution is its location being right in the heart of London. So whether that is doing things like going to the museums, either sort of leisure or indeed kind of for academic purposes, or indeed sort of thinking further ahead in terms of those kind of employer engagement and networking opportunities. Also to highlight, we're not the only ones to say it's such a fantastic city. So London has been voted once more the best student city by the QS rankings as well. And that's for things like international outlook, employability, and really the sort of connectivity of the city. So just to mention what we do offer, so I mentioned we're quite specialised, but we have a whole range of programmes within the STEM field, so a wide range of engineering disciplines, many different sort of science programmes. Our Faculty of Natural Sciences is the home of Miriam's Institute, the Centre for Environmental Policy, and then both undergraduate and graduate level, many different kind of programmes in the medicine faculty as well, covering range from kind of things like policy and public health to the kind of clinical sciences. Our business school currently only offer graduate full degrees at the moment, but do offer some joint undergraduate options. We also then have a number of institutes that kind of cross the disciplines together, and this kind of highlights the areas that we think as an institution we can really kind of make a difference in. So we want our scientists to work with our engineers, work with our medics, work with our business leaders to tackle some of the world's biggest problems. So we have things like our Energy Futures Lab and our Grantham Institute for Climate Change that draw all these disciplines together. I mentioned the innovation side of things, so just to mention that all our students have access to these things. So we have a hack space that students, no matter which discipline they're involved in, can go along and access 3D printers, laser cutters, woodwork, metalwork machines, so they can make their ideas into a physical reality. They can then go along to the Enterprise Lab and get support in developing the kind of business side of their ideas and participate in enterprise programs such as Venture Capitalist Challenge and our female-only entrepreneurship program, We Innovate. And as Miriam mentioned, you know, it's not all kind of work and no play. So there's many different ways to kind of spend your time whilst you're studying with us, if that's what you're interested in, whether that's through the 380 different clubs and societies, ranging from kind of music, sports, cultural, academic programs, to kind of practice using the practice rooms next door at the Royal College of Music, or volunteering, for example. Just very briefly, kind of, you know, very much can answer any questions about applications individually. I'll leave my contact details. For any prospective undergraduate students, you would apply via UCAS, whereas as graduate students, you'd be applying directly to us. The master's application process is fairly straightforward. We're mainly looking at your undergraduate transcripts. We don't normally require kind of additional testing like GMAT or GRE, although there are a couple of exceptions to those. You then require 2 references and to write a personal statement. For research programs, there are kind of 2 different routes. So it may be that there are advertised PhD vacancies, or in many cases, actually identifying who you think would be the best supervisor for you. So it's a question of looking at the research going on and seeing where it would be a good match for you, and then approaching that person to see if they would be able to take you on to supervise. Just to mention the other kind of support people at institutions, so whether that's through kind of academic support or independent kind of counselling services, we do want to really highlight how there is a support network out there for you when you come to study with us. There's also a dedicated international student support team, so they do everything from supporting the kind of immigration side, applying for your visa, all the way through to kind of doing sort of orientation programs and student meetups when you actually arrive on campus. We also have a fantastic career service, so do highlight them because they are there from day one to support you no matter which career you want to go in afterwards. We have large employer fairs on campus each year, and you can rest assured that employers do want to come onto campus and meet with our students and do want to employ them afterwards. And as a result, we have some of the best employability rates of any UK university, with our students being highly employable and earning a good salary after they leave us. And they do go on to do a very wide range of things. So yes, you know, many students go on to work in sort of engineering and science disciplines or the management and business world. As I mentioned, many students are kind of forging their own path with those kind of entrepreneurial ideas and that kind of enterprise support as well. So it's a very quick whistle-stop tour of Imperial, but very happy to kind of stay in touch and answer any sort of specific questions you might have offline, or of course, very happy to answer questions you have now as well. But do sort of check us out on social media, have a look at any other webinars we do, for example. But yes, thank you very much for listening.
Fabulous, thank you very much, Catherine. So we do have a number of questions coming through now. So before we get into them, both Miriam and Catherine, are you okay to stay on potentially a little bit beyond the hour? I will actually have to leave on time, but then, so I'll start the Q&A and then I'll slide off and Karina will be with you to finish things off. Sorry about that. I've got another meeting I need to dash to.
Yeah, no problem. No, I'm sorry if I went over. I think I could
No,
talk about
no,
my research
it was
for hours.
super interesting. No, and we've got lots of quite detailed questions as well for you, Miriam. So I think, yeah, no, everyone found it really interesting. So I think we'll start the Q&A with a question from Marianne Oliveira, who asks, and this will be for Miriam, how has the internet changed communication in the environmental sciences, and what factors make research in environmental science particularly difficult? So actually, there are two questions.
Wow, those are really great questions. How has the internet changed communication in environmental sciences? I think it has. I think well, a couple of things. I think now we're starting to get research looking into this, with renewable energy, for example, with the internet, service providers are now able to see exactly, by collecting data on peaks and troughs in renewable energy and when people are using energy, they're able to make decisions about when backup grids need to be turned on and off. And so I think the internet helps with information that can enable more environmentally friendly decisions for things like renewable energy. And I also think that in terms of communication and education, the internet has been able to enhance education, especially in schools, because instead of just teaching something from a textbook about what's happening to the planet, with the benefit of the internet and the fact that we can access data in real time on what the level of pollution in London is at the time that you're looking at it, what it was like yesterday. I think because you have more real-time data because of the internet and access to information about places across the globe, it helps both make it the climate crisis and climate change issues seem more relevant, more pressing, more real, and it also enables responding to them in a more timely manner. And I think that sort of leads into one of the challenges with environmental sciences is that there's frequently a lag time between when fossil fuels are burned and greenhouse gas emissions collect in the atmosphere. It still takes a little bit of time for the temperature to rise, for the polar ice caps to melt, and then get that. So there's often this kind of lag time between environmental impact and sort of environmental damage and when it shows up. And that was one thing that was a big issue with shale gas extraction. In my research, when I was looking at it, it was known that a lot of the chemicals were known carcinogens that were used in this fracking fluid, but there was a lag time between when the chemicals were put into the environment, when people had exposure, and when the health impact started showing up. So in the US now, 10, 20 years on after shale gas extraction has been expanding, we're starting to get long-term studies that show that there are a number of cancers and other health issues that have come come about because of that. But I think there's that lag time. That's one challenge. And on the flip side of that is, I think research and kind of getting research into, I think science-led policy is really important. So it's not just the research that you do, but what you do with it. And because politicians are frequently, making decisions on political timescales, which are much shorter than, thinking about our children and our children's children and the sort of long-term sustainability. So decisions are frequently made on shorter timescales when really we need to be making decisions on a longer timescale.
Great, hope that answers your question. We have another question from Elizabeth, who says, I'm an architect interested in sustainable construction processes to aid the housing matter in my country. Am I eligible to join the Leaders in Energy community?
Of course, anybody is. Anybody can join. I think that's the great thing about it, is that everybody has an important role to play. So yeah, definitely.
Great, so hopefully Elizabeth will be joining soon. We have another question from Ariana. Miriam, do you think the activities you have had with children might work with college students. I'm working on a zero waste project at my university, UNAM, so I'm assuming it's in Mexico, and I'm a little bit worried about the student response and concern.
Yes, I definitely think so. I think there have been, I've read some interesting studies that talk about, citizen science activities with university students. And actually the first citizen science example that I mentioned, the raspberry shakes, the seismographs, that was being rolled out at a university. It was University of Oklahoma. So definitely, I think citizen science projects, and especially eco citizen science, outdoor citizen science projects, can work with people of all ages, from kids up to adults.
Great, especially when the projects are so interesting, like the one you just presented. I think everyone can get their mind in those topics.
Yeah.
So we have another question. I saw they sent that through the chat. So I think this one might be more for Catherine. Is asking if Imperial College London offers postdoctoral positions for international students. And Ariana says that she's creating a foundation aimed at teaching sustainable development to children through cinema, and who she can contact for advice.
Right. So in terms of postdocs, there will be some positions available. You apply for postdocs a bit more like a job application, though. It's not the same process that I mentioned in terms of kind of applying for a PhD or a master's program. So it's a little bit different. And I have to say I'm not an expert in it, but we would advertise most likely the postdoc positions kind of on our job site of the website. So if you have a look kind of there. And then it would be the kind of more the regular employment rules. So in terms of perhaps needing to get a visa for the university to sponsor you, that kind of thing. So it'd be quite a different process normally to applying to do a kind of study position as a research PhD would be. Just remind me the second part of the question again, sorry. Oh, sorry, Karine, you're on mute.
Thank you for that. Yeah, actually the second question is from Ariana, and she asked because who she can contact for advice. She's creating a foundation aimed to teaching sustainable development to children through cinema. So she just wants to know some advice on that.
I don't know if Miriam, you would have any ideas about anyone.
Yeah, I mean, I'm first of all, I'm totally happy to stay in touch. I don't, I think my contact information is up on the website, but yeah, I mean, it sounds really interesting. I'd be happy to talk about it. I don't know if there's, I wonder if there's somebody I know either at my department or, or maybe in Leaders in Energy who might know a bit more about cinema. But yeah, I'd be happy to stay in touch. So please feel free to contact me.
Yeah, so for everyone that signed up, I just want to remind you that we will be sharing a recording of this session and also Catherine and Miriam's contact details so you can follow up with them as well. And we have no questions at the moment, so this is your last chance to hear from them. So this is like a couple of minutes. You got to use either the Q&A or the chat to send in your questions. And while they type, I just want to thank everyone for attending today, and also for to Miriam and Catherine for such good presentation, really interesting topics, and also being part of our Outstanding Women campaign. As Jessica mentioned in the beginning, this is like our last webinar from this campaign. So we're really glad that everyone joined, because we saw that some people went through all the whole webinars this week. So we hope all these women's stories inspired you as they did to us already, and they help you to keep going on your career, either if it's professional or academic, and they help you to push your limits, especially to women's that will be celebrating International Women's Day really soon, couple of days. So thank you everyone for joining, and of course to Imperial to being part of this campaign, to Miriam to taking the time to share all that experience that she has, and big congratulations from the British Council on all your accomplishments, Miriam.
Thank you.
Well, it seems like we have no more questions. So I don't know if you have anything else to add before we close up.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm really very happy to stay in touch with anybody. And I definitely, I mean, I can't recommend Imperial in my department highly enough. I think I've had a really great experience. So if you have questions at a later time, both about, living in London, either, doing the master's or more, other questions about, happy to answer any of that. Or if you just want to stay in touch and talk about environmental issues. So yeah, please do feel free to reach out.
Do you have anything to add, Catherine, before we...
No, just thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, Miriam, for amazing presentation, just hearing so much, and thank you everyone else for joining us to listen.
Okay, well, that will be it for us from the Outstanding Women campaign. And remember, if you didn't have the chance to join any of the other webinars, in the webpage, the British Council American webpage, you will be able to find all the recordings and also to learn more about all the speakers that we hosted. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.